If a man ignores you, the first thing that usually crosses your mind is asking yourself what you did wrong. Did you say something inappropriate? Did his interest change suddenly? But what if I told you that his indifference has more to do with his own insecurities than with any mistake you think you may have made? Louise Hay used to affirm that what we project onto others is often a reflection of our own fears and internal wounds. So if a man chooses to distance himself and avoid you, what is he really expressing with his silence? Is it coldness, disinterest, or simply a mask to hide what he doesn't want to face or admit, neither to you nor to himself? The truth is that, just like women, the male mind is also full of shadows, hidden corners where his deepest fears hide. Louise Hay called this the shadow, that aspect of our personality that we try to deny or repress. When a man ignores you, it's not always about disinterest. Often, without realizing it, he's reflecting his own insecurities, his fear of attachment, or even a sense of inferiority that he prefers to avoid at all costs. His apparent indifference may actually be the clearest sign of an internal battle he doesn't even know how to handle. Now, why do some men act this way? Is it a matter of pride, emotional coldness, or simply a deep fear of showing vulnerability? It's easy to think that his silence is a sign of strength, but the truth is that it may be the exact opposite. Louise Hay used to say that until we make conscious what is in our unconscious, it will continue to direct our lives, and we will call it destiny. So does this man really have control over his actions, or is he a prisoner of his own internal conflicts? This is where many women make the most common mistake. They see his indifference as a challenge they need to overcome. They try to grab his attention, prove their worth, or decipher the enigma of his behavior. But according to Louise Hay, true power is not in chasing what seems unattainable, but in learning from each experience and strengthening our own essence. Instead of obsessing over what his silence means, what if you started asking yourself what he is trying to teach you about yourself? Think about it. What if his biggest weakness wasn't his apparent detachment, but his inability to handle what he truly feels for you? In this video, we will explore what it really means when a man ignores you and how this attitude, far from being a sign of superiority, can become the key to reclaiming your power. He pulls away because he's certain that, no matter what happens, you will always be there. He believes he can come and go at his convenience, confident that your interest in him will never change. But what happens when that certainty disappears? What happens when suddenly you're no longer that predictable woman he took for granted? Louise Hay said that the greatest illusion of humans is believing they can control what they don't understand, and this perfectly applies to relationships. A man only feels the absence of someone when he realizes that the stability he once had has been replaced by uncertainty. His ability isn't in pulling away, but in his conviction that you would never leave. But when you decide to stop reacting, waiting, and showing unwavering interest, everything changes. You stop being a passive piece in his story and become an enigma, a mystery that he can no longer solve easily. And it's at this point where his mind enters into conflict because, as Louise Hay said, what humans fear the most is what they can't predict. Not knowing for sure what will happen with you creates a doubt that eats away at him more than the loss itself. Many women fall into the trap of trying to regain the attention of a man who ignores them. They post indirect messages, check if he has seen their texts, and look for excuses to appear on his radar. But paradoxically, all of this only reinforces his sense of control. What truly changes the game is understanding that your absence has more impact than any desperate attempt to be noticed. When he starts to notice that you no longer text him, that you don't react to his posts, that you're no longer making an effort to get his attention, an emptiness opens up in his mind. The woman he thought he knew is no longer there. And this is the first big weakness of a man who ignores a woman. He only feels in control as long as he thinks she's still available. When that belief is broken, he enters a state of uncertainty that may lead him to question things he never imagined. What if he's lost something valuable? What if you're no longer part of his world as you once were? Louise Hay said that everything we reject in others is a reflection of what we reject in ourselves. That's why many times a man pulls away, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't want to face the impact you have on him. But what if one day he realizes that he has lost that? Now let's go further. Would you like to know the 5 most sensitive points of a man who pulls away and ignores you? Those triggers that, when touched, can make even the proudest reconsider their attitudes? Then stay with me, because what's coming next could completely change the way you see this game. When you decide to disappear from his life, when you stop reacting to his indifference, something unexpected happens. He begins to feel an uncomfortable sensation that didn't exist before. Suddenly, the presence he took for granted is no longer there, and without realizing it, he gets a small dose of his own medicine. The silence that once served him to feel in control now turns against him. Louise Hay said that the human psyche always seeks balance, and when one extreme disappears, the other intensifies. If he once felt secure by ignoring you, now the emptiness of your absence begins to weigh on him. And this is where the signs begin. Suddenly, you notice that he's looking at your statuses, reacting to a post, or leaving a subtle comment as if trying to remind you that he's still there. But the difference is that now he no longer has the certainty that you will be there as well. The attention he received effortlessly now becomes his biggest weakness. Louise Hay teaches us that the human mind hates uncertainty, and when something constant disappears, the brain enters a state of alert. This is the second big weak point of a man who ignores you, the security of believing you will always be there. And when that security breaks, his inner world starts to tremble. And this is just the beginning. Do you want to discover what other sensitive points could make a man who ignores you react in a way he didn't expect? Then keep watching, because what's coming next could completely change the way you understand his behaviors and how you position yourself in this story. One of the reasons a man feels comfortable ignoring you is because, in his mind, he believes he has absolute control over the situation. If he perceives that you are emotionally dependent on his attention, that you fear losing him, or that you think you'll never find someone better, his confidence gets reinforced, and his indifference becomes a power strategy. But what happens when that dynamic changes? When a woman stops projecting an energy of lack and instead begins to radiate confidence and abundance, something in the man's mind becomes unbalanced. Louise used to say that what we resist persists, and in relationships, the same happens. The more you chase someone, the further they move away. But when you distance yourself and place yourself at the center of your own life, the situation completely transforms. Because when he feels that the influence he had over you is starting to fade, when he notices that his absence no longer affects you the same way, something changes inside him. A feeling appears that wasn't there before: uncertainty. And this is the key point. The game truly shifts when you strengthen your self-esteem, when you stop settling for crumbs of attention, and above all, when you understand that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. The woman who knows herself, who knows her worth, doesn't chase, beg, or wear herself out trying to be seen. She simply becomes irresistible because she projects a magnetic energy that doesn't depend on external validation. And when you reach this level of personal security, not only do you reclaim your power, but you also weaken his. Because suddenly, he no longer has the certainty that he can ignore you and come back whenever he wants, without consequences. Now it's him who starts questioning, what if she's no longer there when I decide to return? Before we move on to the next weak point of a man who ignores you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that a man ignored you because he knew he could do so without it changing anything? If this content is helping you, give it a like right now and tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. And don't leave just yet, because at the end of this video, I will explain exactly how to make a man who distances himself learn to value you and, even more, fear losing you. So keep watching, because now we are going to discover another weak point that can completely change this game. When a man pulls away and ignores you, he does so with the arrogance of someone who believes he is the center of your universe. He feels unique, special, indispensable for your happiness. And do you know why? Because many women, without realizing it, feed that illusion. They lock themselves in the relationship, invest all their energy in him, and in the process forget that there are other areas of their life that also deserve attention. Louise Hay used to say that whatever we focus our energy on grows. So if all your attention is on a man who ignores you, the only thing you're doing is reinforcing the sense of control that he believes he has over you. But what if suddenly he realizes that he is no longer the only focus of your attention? The third weak point of a man who ignores you is precisely the illusion of exclusivity that he believes he has. To break this cycle, you need to weaken the sense of superiority that keeps him in his comfort zone. The best way to do this is to reconnect with yourself and with the people who truly add to your life, your friends, your family, the activities that make you passionate. Maybe without realizing it, you drifted away from these connections because you were too focused on them. But when you decide to prioritize them again, something powerful happens. Your world expands, your energy changes, and he starts to realize that he is not, and never was, the only pillar of your happiness. And here is something important. It's not about looking for another man to replace him. You don't need to fill a void with someone else. The key is to rediscover yourself, open up to new experiences, and surround yourself with people who make you feel valuable and fulfilled. And what happens with him in this process? The feeling of being irreplaceable begins to crumble. Louise Hay used to say that what humans fear most is losing control over what they thought they possessed. And when a man realizes that you are no longer the same woman who waited for him patiently, he starts to feel exactly what you used to feel: uncertainty. This is a blow that's difficult for him to process. But there's more. Because when we reach this point, the rules of the game change completely. In the next few minutes, I will reveal how to take advantage of this in your favor, so that instead of you being the one waiting, he will be the one who begins to doubt and question whether he can continue ignoring you without consequences. So, stay with me, because what's coming next could make you see this entire situation with new eyes. One of the biggest weak points of a man who ignores you is his unconscious need to feel indispensable to you. There are men who convince themselves that a woman needs them, whether emotionally, financially, or even for security in her life. This belief gives them a false sense of control. But what happens when you show him that your life doesn't depend on his presence, that you don't need him, but rather you consciously choose who you allow to be by your side? In that moment, the dynamic changes. You are no longer the needy woman, the one he could ignore without consequences. Now, you are an independent woman who doesn't need anyone to feel fulfilled and who only accepts people into her life who truly add value. And this is something that can destabilize him, because it means that if he wants to continue being part of your world, he will have to prove that he has something valuable to offer. It's no longer enough for him to show up from time to time or give intermittent signs of interest. Now the burden is on him, and this is where the game changes completely. He can continue ignoring you if he wants, but what used to work in his favor now starts to work against him. Because while you evolve, grow, and become stronger and more confident, he realizes something he had never considered. He no longer has the same power over you. And then a truth arises that he cannot ignore. It's not you who is losing, it's him. Before moving on to the final advice, the one that will show you exactly how to make a man who distances himself not only learn to value you, but also fear losing you, I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed this pattern in a relationship? If this video is helping you see things more clearly, give it a like right now and tell me in the comments. What comes next could completely transform the way you face this situation. So, stay with me, because now we are going to discover the last piece of this puzzle. A man's self-esteem is one of his most sensitive points, and at the same time, one of his biggest weaknesses. When he decides to distance himself and ignore you, he is operating from a position of apparent confidence. But here's where a principle that Louise Hay strongly defended comes into play. A person's identity is built from the projections and reflections they receive from others. What does this mean? It means that when a man feels admired, desired, and valued by a woman, he receives a dose of self-esteem that strengthens his ego. It's like an invisible fuel that gives him the feeling of control over the situation. But what happens when that source of validation is cut off? When, suddenly, he no longer feels the unconditional admiration from your part? When the attention he used to receive from you disappears without warning, something inside him begins to weaken. The truth is that most men don't realize the impact of a woman's presence until she emotionally distances herself. It's not necessary to ignore him physically or play unnecessary games. The real change occurs when you stop treating him like someone special, when you stop magnifying his presence in your life, when suddenly he is no longer the center of your attention. This affects his psyche in a way he can't even explain with words. Louise Hay used to say that the human unconscious operates symbolically, and when a man perceives that the woman who used to elevate him no longer looks at him the same way, no longer gives him the same importance, something inside him destabilizes. He doesn't fully understand it, but he feels it. And here's the key. This is one of the most powerful weak points of a man. He gets used to being desired and admired without having to do anything to deserve it. But the moment that validation disappears, what was once just a source of comfort becomes a lack, a void. He doesn't know how to fill. And it's precisely in that moment that you must be one step ahead. Instead of begging for attention or trying to prove your worth, you simply withdraw that energy from him and redirect it back to yourself. You become the woman who doesn't need his approval to feel complete. And it's at that exact moment that he begins to see what he's really losing. But there's more. In the next few minutes, I will show you how to transform this dynamic completely and make it so that instead of you questioning your value, he starts to ask himself if he can really continue ignoring you without consequences. What comes next is the final key that will make him begin to feel the need to win you back, instead of you waiting for him. So stay with me, because this last part could make a huge difference in how you view this situation, and even more so in how he starts to see you. When a woman becomes fully aware of her own value and understands that her well-being doesn't depend on the presence or approval of a man, a fundamental change occurs in the relationship dynamic. The one who once felt secure ignoring her, confident that she would always be there no matter how he treated her, starts to experience a feeling he hadn't considered until that moment: uncertainty. And when he perceives that the attention and affection he used to receive unconditionally are no longer available without effort, his security cracks, forcing him to reconsider many things he had previously taken for granted. One of the most determining factors in generating this impact on a man's mind has nothing to do with manipulation tactics or superficial strategies of artificial indifference. It has to do with applying a much more powerful principle: the principle of reciprocity. Louise Hay affirmed that relationships are mirrors that reflect back what we give. However, if there's an imbalance in that reflection, where only one of the parties offers admiration, desire, and attention, while the other simply receives without feeling the need to reciprocate, the balance tips in favor of the one who exerts the least effort. This is exactly what happens when a woman gives everything without ensuring that she receives the same in return. The moment a man gets used to receiving without having to make any effort to deserve it, the attention and affection she gives him lose value in his eyes. He begins to perceive her presence as something guaranteed, as if it were a right instead of a privilege that requires care and reciprocity. This is the reason why so many women end up feeling exhausted and frustrated in their relationships. They give themselves completely, hoping that at some point that man will open his eyes and realize everything he has received, returning that love with the same intensity. However, the reality is that recognition doesn't come when you wait passively, but when an internal change is made that alters the power dynamic in the relationship. This is the change you need to make right now. A woman who truly understands her worth never gives everything away for free, nor without ensuring there is balance. She knows that for a relationship to be healthy and meaningful, there must be reciprocity, and that her self-love is the foundation of any solid bond. When a woman adopts this mindset, the dynamic changes completely. The man who once ignored her and felt free to distance himself whenever he wanted, without fear of losing her, now faces a completely different reality. Suddenly, he can no longer take for granted that she will always be there, ready to accept any scraps of attention from him. And it's at this point that his security begins to crumble, and he starts to question whether he truly has control of the situation. If you have ever felt that you gave more in a relationship than you received, tell me in the comments. And if this content is helping you see things more clearly, hit like right now, because what's coming next could make you see this situation from a completely different perspective. The real change happens when you understand that the way a man treats you is a direct reflection of how he perceives his own value in your life. If he feels he can walk away, ignore you, and come back whenever he pleases, without consequences, he will never feel the need to make an effort or fear losing you. Louise Hay explained that unconsciously, human beings tend to test the limits of others to see how far they can go without facing repercussions. This happens in relationships more often than you think. Many men, without even realizing it, adopt behavior patterns where they choose to distance themselves, show indifference, and play with a woman's emotional uncertainty, knowing that no matter what they do, she will always be available to them. But what would happen if that certainty suddenly disappeared? When a woman decides to stop offering validation for free and breaks the predictability of her behavior, the impact on that man's psyche is much deeper than he can understand. He had become accustomed to the idea that his presence was enough to receive attention and admiration without any effort. However, the moment he realizes that attention is no longer guaranteed, he starts to experience an emotion that until then he hadn't associated with you: insecurity. Louise Hay said that the human mind is designed to seek patterns and stability because it gives us a sense of control over our reality. But when someone who is always available suddenly changes their attitude, the brain enters an alert state, and it's at this precise moment when the game changes direction. The man who once ignored now feels he no longer has absolute control. He is forced to reconsider if he can really continue acting the same way without consequences. Because for the first time in a long time, he starts to feel that he might lose something valuable. This is where the difference lies between a woman who is valued and one who is ignored. The former knows that her attention is a privilege, not an obligation. She doesn't chase, doesn't beg, and above all, doesn't accept less than she deserves. And when a man perceives that there is a real possibility of losing her, his desire for control transforms into a need to be accepted again. But the most important thing in all of this is that at this point, the woman who once waited is no longer waiting for anything. She has become a woman who no longer needs to be chosen, because she has understood that she always had the power to choose who she allows to be in her life. This is the mindset shift that ultimately makes a man realize the true value of a woman, and this is only the beginning of something much deeper. One of the biggest mistakes a woman can make in a relationship is clinging to the hope that one day a man will open his eyes and finally recognize her true worth. However, what many don't realize is that no one can see in them what they themselves haven't learned to recognize first. Louise Hay affirmed that everything we accept in others is a reflection of what we have accepted within ourselves. If you constantly settle for less than you truly deserve and continue investing time, energy, and love in someone who doesn't show the same level of commitment, the message you are sending to your own mind is that maybe you are not valuable enough to receive something better. This belief, although not always conscious, ends up shaping the way you allow others to treat you. When you cling to a relationship where there is no reciprocity and justify indifference with the hope that one day that person will change, in reality, what you are doing is strengthening the idea that your self-love depends on external validation. But the reality is that the only person who can change this situation is you yourself. Now imagine for a moment what happens when you stop living based on that expectation and start knowing yourself from a place of complete security and emotional self-sufficiency. Think about the impact it can have on a man's mind when, from one day to the next, he notices that the woman who once idealized him and anxiously awaited his attention now seems completely free from his influence. At that moment, the security he had fades, and for the first time, he starts to question whether he has made a mistake by taking your presence for granted. When a man feels he has lost control of the situation, an emotion appears that he hadn't considered until that moment: fear. It's not just the fear of losing you as a person, but the unsettling feeling of realizing that he is no longer a fundamental part of your life, that he has ceased to be relevant, and that his absence no longer causes the effect he expected. This loss of influence can be devastating to his ego because until then, he had relied on the idea that no matter what he did, you would always be there for him. This is where the power dynamic changes completely. The question is no longer whether he will return or not, but whether you really want someone who is only capable of valuing you when faced with the possibility of losing you. Before continuing to explore this, I want you to take a moment to reflect and ask yourself if you have ever been in a similar situation. If you've noticed that you've given too much in a relationship without receiving the same in return. It's important to understand that this is not a matter of bad luck or always finding the wrong person, but of how you yourself have allowed this dynamic to repeat. Louise Hay said that what we don't confront within ourselves, we inevitably project outward. If you find yourself trapped in a pattern where you constantly attract people who don't value you or make you feel invisible, maybe it's time to ask yourself why you keep investing more in others than you invest in yourself. If you spend more time worrying about what he feels, what he wants, or what he thinks, without stopping to ask yourself what you really need, then it's likely that you've been placing your self-esteem in someone else's hands. And this, more than anything else, is what really needs to change. The biggest mistake a woman can make is thinking she needs to prove her worth to someone who, if they truly wanted her in their life, would see it without the need for constant tests or sacrifices. If a man believes he can ignore you without any consequences, he will never feel the need to make an effort for you. And if he is also convinced that he can walk away and return whenever he wants, without doing anything to deserve your attention, he will never fear losing you. You are the one who teaches him how he should treat you. You are the one who sets the boundaries of what you accept and what you don't. If up until now you haven't been valued as you truly deserve, maybe it's time to make a profound change in the way you see yourself and in what you decide to allow in your life. Because at the end of the day, this situation has never been about him. It's about you, the image you have of your own worth, and how you position yourself in your relationships. Louise Hay said that everything we attract into our lives is a reflection of what we carry inside. If you constantly find yourself with people who don't prioritize you, who ignore you, or who seem to not see all that you have to offer, instead of asking yourself what's wrong with them, start asking yourself when you began to believe you had to fight for someone's attention to be seen. The woman who truly knows her own worth never wears herself out trying to be recognized. She doesn't need to prove anything because her mere presence is enough to attract those who truly deserve to be in her life. And here is where everything makes sense. The man who ignores you today may seem self-assured, but deep down, he is also afraid. He is afraid of losing the control he thought he had over you, afraid of no longer being the center of your world, and above all, afraid of realizing that he may have wasted the attention of an incredible woman who now has simply decided to move on. Mikim, if you take everything you've learned here and apply it to your life, if you work on strengthening your self-esteem, if you learn to be emotionally independent, and if you promise yourself that you will never accept less than you truly deserve, he will feel that change in a way he won't be able to ignore. And at that moment, he will only have two options. Either he learns to value you in a genuine and sincere way, or he will finally understand that he never had as much power over you as he thought. But before you ask yourself whether he will react or not, there's an even more important question you should ask yourself. Do you really want to be with someone who only realizes your worth when he feels he could lose you? Wouldn't it be much better to be with someone who chooses you from the start, without games, without tests, and without conditions, simply because they know you're an extraordinary person and don't need to doubt that? The truth is, the woman who has options never gets desperate over a man who pulls away. She doesn't try to convince anyone to choose her, because she knows that her worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. In her world, love is not something to beg for or negotiate. It is something that flows naturally. If you have to try too hard for someone to see you, maybe it's time to stop trying to make them do so and start seeing yourself with the eyes with which you always wanted others to see you. The real lesson behind everything you've learned here today is not just about how to make a man feel your absence. It is much deeper than that. It is about becoming a woman who will never again beg for attention. A woman who will never again feel the need to wait for a message, a signal, or any type of external validation to feel complete. It's time to leave behind the mindset of someone who settles for crumbs of affection and begin living with the absolute certainty that self-love is the foundation on which everything truly worthwhile is built. Because the moment you decide to change the way you perceive yourself, the entire world begins to respond to that renewed energy. And what is most ironic about all this is that the same man who once believed he could ignore you without consequences suddenly finds himself trapped in a completely unexpected situation, the desperate need to regain what he lost without realizing it. But this is where you must ask yourself the most important question of all. Do you really want to stay in the same place, waiting for a man to finally realize your worth? Or would you rather step forward and become that woman who will never again have to worry about that, because she already knows with absolute certainty who she is and what she deserves? That answer depends solely on you, because at the end of the day, what truly makes you powerful is not the reaction you generate in others, but the way you see yourself. And when you truly internalize this truth, when you deeply feel that you should have never settled for less than you are worth, that is where the real change occurs. From that moment on, you will never accept half-hearted relationships again, nor endless waiting, nor empty promises, simply because you will no longer be available for anything that is not up to your own self-love. If this video has opened your mind and made you see things from a completely different perspective, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because this is not just a video to reflect on. It's the beginning of a journey of deep transformation. You deserve so much more than a simple moment of clarity. You deserve support, information, and tools that help you build the life you truly want. And here we are, to walk that path together. And of course, if this content has been useful to you, give it a like right now. Not only does it help me continue creating material that truly makes a difference, but it also allows other women who need to hear this message to know that they are not alone. If at any point you've experienced a situation like this, if you've ever felt you were giving too much without receiving the same in return, I invite you to share your experience in the comments. Let's talk about it, because simply putting into words what you've lived may be the first step to changing it. And lastly, I want to remind you of something you may have forgotten. The power has always been in your hands. You just needed to realize it. So now, stop waiting, stop doubting, and stop asking for what should always have been yours by right. Lift your head, walk with confidence, and live the life you truly deserve, without excuses, without fears, and without looking back.